Good morning, everyone. I am really looking forward to spending the rest of the morning speaking to you about artificial intelligence and about how we can use that to accelerate our sustainable development goals or achievement of the sustainable development goals. A brief outline dealing with the SDGs, telling you about what the sustainable development goals are about. We'll speak a little bit around how they came about. So what are the sustainable development goals? We'll have a backdrop around their inception. We'll then speak a little bit about some of the mechanisms that are going to be involved for us to accelerate progress when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll speak about artificial intelligence. It's going to take center stage here today. So we'll speak a little bit about artificial intelligence. We'll touch on it from a technical perspective so that you have some understanding around some of the buzzwords when it comes to artificial intelligence. And we'll also speak about it from a use case perspective so that you see how it is being used within the world in some of the countries that you are from as well. And then we'll end up speaking a little bit about your role in terms of using artificial intelligence and how you'll use that to accelerate achievement of the SDGs. So we'll make it more applicable to you for your specific context. And let's get started looking at the Sustainable Development Goals at a glance. Now, these in most instances, need no introduction. But I thought what would be helpful is to actually pull back the lens a little bit and look at where the SDGs have come from. So in around 2015, this is when the SDGs were incepted. This is their point of inception. And what happened here was that there was a global effort to create these goals that would be applicable to sustainability from a human perspective, and something that we could use to drive us forward in order to create sustainability. So there was this team that worked on developing these Sustainable Development Goals. However, 17 goals does not easily roll off the tongue. And so what happened was that this team realized that they needed to create a brand around the SDGs. And what resulted from that is the creation of the SDG wheel, the colors, the icons, the shortened names. And that's how the brand of SDGs was actually born. So this team had this target that in the first year, they wanted to reach every single individual on the planet so that they are aware of the SDGs and that they can help accelerate that. There was a huge marketing drive. I believe at some instance, the Pope was even involved in assisting with marketing. That failed, but one of Google's projects, Project Everyone, reported that in that first year, 3 billion people were exposed to the SDGs. And that is quite significant. Over and above that, what that report revealed was that the stakeholders that are important when it comes to understanding what the SDGs are and moving them forward are individuals that come from civil society, from government, and from business. And if you think about the makeup of the room that we have here today, we actually have those players here. Now, where we are at with the SDGs is that we are essentially at halftime. We're at our halfway mark. The SDGs were meant to be run for 14 years, and last year was when we reported in terms of us being at the halfway point. So what I'd like to start off doing is take a snapshot in terms of where we are at halfway and look at that for now. I'm actually moving to the next slide. So where we are at right now is the fact that we have achieved a mere 15% of our Sustainable Development Goals. It means that 15% of them are on track, that we will be meeting them, and that by 2030, we're going to achieve these. Then we have about half of them, so about 47% of the SDGs that are deviating from their target. So they're either deviating by a small margin or by a large margin, but there is deviation from the target. And that is half of the SDGs. And then we have about 1/3, I think it's around 37 SDGs that are not meeting their target. And in some instances, they've actually regressed from their 2015 baseline. And this is quite significant, the fact that we are here at the halfway mark. These were presented to the UN in September last year. And the UN General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, actually said when he had seen this was that he said that the SDGs are not just a set of goals. They represent the hopes, inspiration, dreams of people everywhere. The fact that we are at 15% now in terms of us being on track with the SDGs, instead of not leaving any one person behind, we actually risk leaving the SDGs themselves behind. And that is quite significant. The fact that we need to take note of where we are right now and look at ways in which we can make these better. Now, taking the snapshot view also helps us to understand what has resulted in us being at this stage presently. What we can see is that if we look at Goal 3, for example, and we look at good health and well-being, we can see that there are statistics that say that 3 million children do not reach their first birthday. We know that maternal mortality is increasing. We know that finance is decreasing. Yet there are innovations that exist on the ground that are not being leveraged. Now, what this basically means and when studies were done, there are 3 C's that have contributed to where we are at right now with the SDGs. These are COVID, climate change, and the high cost of living. But it's actually conflict that has caused the high cost of living. There is, however, optimism based on this, because even though we do have these life expectancy that's decreasing, for example, or issues around life expectancy that could decrease, we have innovations, we have vaccinations, we have health innovations that could essentially put us on the right trajectory. We have an optimistic looking trajectory enabling us to increase life expectancy and to improve these goals. So the idea is that there is optimism around this. There is just a lot that needs to be done. So then comes in the burning question: how are we going to accelerate achievement of these SDGs? The World Economic Forum has recognized that one of the main ways around this is by increasing finance. So the idea here is to increase concessional finance, to increase investment around the SDGs. There's also talk around building partnerships and collaboration, which is quite key. And I'll give a few examples in a little while around how partnerships and collaboration are actually coming into play and why it's so significant. We speak about localized solutions. Over half of the SDGs need to be implemented at local level. And that's quite significant. The fact that it comes down to the actual municipalities and regions that are dealing with these specific issues. Leveraging digital transformation. The principal just mentioned digital transformation. There's a chief economist, Nela Richardson is her name, and she works on global economy questions. And she actually says that digital transformation is the wind beneath the sails when it comes to our global economy. And it has the potential to create great impact. And then, of course, there is the factor that accelerating the use of technology for good is a manner in which we're going to accelerate achievement of the SDGs. So this is at a high level what can be done. Now let's circle back to the point that we are halfway right now in terms of achieving our SDGs. And let's think about sports matches when we think about being at halfway right now. If we think about any sports match that is exciting to watch, it is actually won in the second half, right? And that's the sort of analogy we're going to try to use here. The fact that we're at a point where we can bring in the game changers, we can bring in the star players that are going to assist us and help us get back on track in terms of achieving these SDGs. And when we consider the star players for the SDGs, they are as follows. We'll move to the next slide. Artificial intelligence and innovation, gender equity, more specifically women's power, and financial institutions and the reform that's required in terms of finance. Now, for the purpose of today's session, we're going to focus on the first one, which is artificial intelligence and innovation. And when we look specifically at the first 3 goals, for example, we see that there are breakthroughs that are possible now due to artificial intelligence and what it can bring to the table. And let's perhaps use as a starting point disease research as an example. What we see here is that when it comes to us understanding diseases and developing vaccinations for them, understanding protein structures are something that's quite key. An entire PhD would be spent on modeling a 3D structure for one protein structure, or perhaps 2 protein structures. Science says that we have approximately 200 million protein structures that exist out there. We have, until recently, as humans, only seen about 175,000 of these protein structures. There is a Google initiative called AlphaFold, And what that initiative was able to do was to use AI and in a matter of months map out almost 200 million of those protein 3D structures that are known to us. And that's significant. And then it brings us back to this PhD who's been working on this, spending 3 years to work on developing 1 or 2 protein structures. What do they do now? They essentially have access to a database of protein structures. And now they can further advance the field and do work that was probably not going to be possible in their lifetime. It actually, and when Google did this translation, they actually determined that it's about 1 billion years worth of progress that was done in that short time frame using AI. And that is quite significant. In Tel Aviv at the moment, there is a team that's working on flood forecasting. And what they're able to do is, to a large degree of accuracy, determine what floods or where in the world flooding is going to take place. And they're able to determine this with a 7-day warning that comes into play. And this has a huge effect when you think about heeding to the call, when you think about evacuating people so that they can stay safe. And this is what AI is doing in order to create good in the world. What we're seeing is that these innovations are bringing in fundamentally new players that are attracted to this realm of artificial intelligence and innovation. And what we're essentially going to need is that we're going to need cross-collaboration amongst all of these star players in order for us to get back on track and to be able to achieve these SDGs. And that's fundamentally what it's going to take. Now let's speak a little bit more about artificial intelligence. And let's talk a little bit about that and let that take the center stage for now. When it comes to artificial intelligence, what we're specifically looking at, and one of the pictures I want to paint is a global picture first, to start off looking at some of the top-ranking AI nations. There's a train index that Harvard Business Review has created, and they've mapped countries based on these 4 pillars: data, rules, capital, and innovation. And based on that, they're able to determine which are the top-ranking countries. And it's no surprise that the US and China have taken top spot in this. They have publicly made it known that they want to be leaders when it comes to developing artificial intelligence, not from just a policy perspective, but even from an implementation perspective, a collaboration perspective as well. And no doubt, both countries have taken great strides in order to achieve this. Beyond these 2 countries, there are other geographies that are also contributing to advancing artificial intelligence. These are countries like Indonesia, India, the UK, South Korea, and Japan, just to name a few of them. And you see that they also have changing positions on the train index as well. What we're seeing that these countries bring to the party is that they have large pools of data. The accessibility around the data is actually something that's changing over time. The demographics in the countries are changing over time. And all of that is contributing to their spaces on the train index changing as well. What we're going to see over time is that the power centers when it comes to artificial intelligence will change. And that's why it's important to keep an eye on this train index, because the power centers are essentially going to determine which sectors of artificial intelligence are prioritized globally. They're going to determine what data is used, and they're also going to determine what sort of biases around this data actually comes into play. And so for us to consider what is going to be useful from an AI perspective going forward, it's important for us to keep an eye in terms of what are the geographies involved in AI and how they are progressing over time. Now, we know that AI can be used for good. It no doubt is going to help us advance the Sustainable Development Goals. There's aspects around how it's been used for climate change and creating some positive growth on that perspective. We see how the systemic use of artificial intelligence is actually something that can provide value. So no doubt, the collaboration involved around AI and us using AI as a tool in order to accelerate is really going to be important for us. So that's us speaking about AI from a very general perspective. I want to just touch in very briefly around the technical aspects of AI so that you leave today's masterclass actually understanding some of the terminologies or perhaps being able to respond to a few questions related to artificial intelligence from a technical perspective as well. Let's speak a little bit about machine learning. Contrary to popular belief, machine learning is not a magical box of magic. At its core, machine learning is mathematics that enables us to label items. We can label things using machine learning, and that is at its core what it is about. Now, machine learning itself enables us to program in an entirely different paradigm. But then comes in the question, if that's what machine learning is, then what is AI? So what we've seen over time is academics argue about the nuances of artificial intelligence. What is it not? And we've seen in industry the words artificial intelligence and machine learning being used interchangeably. And in some instances, that's okay. And if that is the case, it means that artificial intelligence then is also mathematics that enables us to label things. And if you think about it from that simple perspective, it's easy to understand what is possible from a machine learning perspective. Say, for example, as a very general example, we want to feed an image of a cat to a computer, and we want for the computer to determine whether or not a cat exists in that image. It would be great if we could just give the image to the computer and say, okay, here's the image, can you tell me whether there's a cat or not in it? The way in which we do that is that we feed a computer with a lot of images of cats. Then we feed the computer with a lot of images that do not have cats in them. And then we're able to give it our test image, the one with the cat, and we want it to respond to say, yes, there is a cat in here. Now, us just feeding in images is us providing the computer with examples, and that's the fundamental paradigm of machine learning that changes everything. The fact that we do not feed the computer with instructions, but we feed the computer with examples. And what it's done is that it's enabled us to unlock an entire class of tasks that were previously not achievable by us humans because we didn't know how to actually ask or how to actually create those instructions. And now what we're able to do is to create the examples that correspond to those instructions. And the machine learning is able to learn the patterns around our specific data and able to translate those examples into instructions for us. So it's actually created a fundamental leap forward when it comes to human progress and us being able to program. Another technical term that you would have come across in headlines is around generative AI. I'm just going to the next slide. So another fundamental term that you would have come across is generative AI. What you'll see around here is that headlines in the artificial intelligence space speak about generative AI. Some of these headlines may in fact have been produced by generative AI itself. By show of hands, how many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, so, right. ChatGPT is actually a chatbot, right? So what it has is this uncanny ability to converse with us like a human being would, and that's why it's become so famous. And the idea around generative AI is that before it even became famous, artificial intelligence and generative AI was said to be a form of machine learning. And basically, if you think about it in this way, then that's fine. The fact that generative AI is machine learning that generates new content. So it basically creates new content. It uses the objects that it has been trained on in the past to create similar objects going forward. That's basically what generative AI is about. In 2017, Google came out with something called the transformer architecture. And that transformer architecture is used in large language models, which forms the base of the natural language processing field. And this, say for example, we have a paragraph of text. Each word in that paragraph will be converted into a token using the transformer architecture. Those tokens would then be mapped on something called an attention map, and they're clustered depending on their specific context. And then the generative algorithm would be able to use that specific clustering to determine what should be generated. And that's exactly how generative AI functions. So it's as simple as that. Now that's as technical as we're going to get today, but the idea is that you are well versed now in terms of understanding what machine learning and generative AI is about. Let's speak a little bit about some of the use cases around artificial intelligence now and see how it's being used. In India, smallholding farmers have a lot of difficulty around erratic weather patterns. They have increased pests that come into play. They are actually trapped with these high interest loans that they've taken within their municipal areas. And there's a project that's come about called the Sago Bago project with the World Economic Forum. And what they've done is partnered with local municipalities in the country in order to create a data management framework. So this data management platform, and they created local policies around how data is managed for these farmers. And what they're able to determine or what they're able to do is to support these farmers in terms of managing their data. It's resulted in 7,000 chili farmers experiencing an increase in their yields, a decline in pests, and they've actually had their incomes soar over the years. So this is actually a good use case to read up on to understand how just managing data in a local context is able to assist and actually increase yields for the agricultural context. Another example in terms of agriculture is one that Microsoft's working on. So the private sector is actually doing something on that. I'm just going to ask for the back to please.
Right now, artificial intelligence helps us meet the needs of today so we're prepared for tomorrow.
By 2050, we need to produce 60% more food. So how are we going to feed the world without wrecking the planet? Using Microsoft artificial intelligence, we can reduce waste and produce more food. Any grower will tell you every row, every crop is different. We can use Microsoft AI to make local predictions about light, wind, rain. This helps farmers know when to plant, irrigate, and harvest. It's making a difference.
Artificial intelligence helps farmers grow more while wasting less.
And one of the key elements around this is being able to make decisions. It's about supporting individuals in order to create and make better decisions. We have a whole team at CSIR working on AI that functions to produce decision-making models. So to aid policy, to aid business decision-making. And there's a use case that comes out from this around safety within the national sphere, within municipal spheres as well. We've seen the Los Angeles Police Department do something like this, where they use historical crime statistics in order to predict where future hotspots of crime is going to take place. And that's important, right? It's important from a safety perspective, especially when we look at a South African context, for example. I've also seen aspects in China where they use a surveillance system in order to predict what future states would look like, in terms of any crime rates, in terms of finding perpetrators to specific crimes, etc. And this is why that's quite important. Decisions can also be made from a social welfare perspective, and this is another example of something that's been done in India. There's a direct transfer system that takes place for social welfare. And here, the idea is that artificial intelligence is used to, one, identify beneficiaries, and also to allocate resources accordingly when it comes to the social welfare system. And this helps introduce a space of transparency, a place when it comes to explaining how these distributions have taken place. And that's how artificial intelligence actually helps. It provides greater power when it comes to being able to make decisions around this. Now, when we look at innovation related to the SDGs, innovation within the AI space itself, one of the key aspects around how we collaborate from an SDG perspective, and perhaps the type of innovators that are important in this realm, are social innovators. And social innovators are able to bring together collaborators in a very unique manner. And what we found is that when it comes to the SDGs themselves, 70% of social innovators are actually using some form of machine learning in their tools or in the solutions that they have developed. We're also seeing that 1 in 4 social innovators are tackling goal 3, which is health and well-being. So we're seeing that AI is being used primarily in that domain. We're also seeing another domain where AI is being used. So we're seeing that 1 in 4 social innovators are targeting climate change. And they're using AI in order to develop that. So these solutions where AI powers the SDGs is actually quite significant as well. We have other organizations, for example, the CSIR, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, based here in South Africa, that's also looking at innovation and how we can develop collaboration and create greater impact in that specific realm. And just to touch on very briefly in terms of what it is that CSIR is doing. This organization functions mainly so that we can create solutions, so that we can accelerate socioeconomic prosperity within the country itself, so that we can build local tools in order to accelerate local prosperity. One of the mechanisms or the way in which it does this is through diversity in terms of its footprint. So its footprint is a national footprint. There are over 2,000 employees within the country, of which about 300 have PhDs, probably the most number of PhDs in one organization in the entire country. And we can see here that there is a diverse base when it comes to who is part of the company. And what is key for innovation is diversity. We find that when solutions are actually based, if we want solutions to not be biased, if we want solutions to be holistic, we need to bring in diverse teams that develop these. There are 9 research centers, and these range all the way through from agriculture to mining to manufacturing to even one that looks at digital technologies itself. So we see that there's quite a large range in terms of research and development from that specific perspective. And what's probably the most important part is around the business model when it comes to artificial intelligence or just general technologies in general. We have the high expertise base, that's actually the input, and those are the employees. And then we've got as processing the development that takes place, so the technology development that takes place. And the output is the actual system that's formed, the licensed, the technology that can be formed, the patent that's actually formed from that. And the aim is largely to create impact. So to create some sort of impact where we can provide value on a national perspective. And to give you an example of something that's been created from an AI perspective or an AI system. As an input, so the idea is an AI system created to provide value to the energy space. A system that can create or detect cracks on solar panels, right? And this particular system would have as an input individuals from an energy research center, individuals from the AI research center, and the idea, or research group, and the idea here is that they would interact to create a system that is able to identify these cracks on solar panels, and they'd produce a sort of product around this that is then commercialized. And the idea is that the value that it provides is for maintenance, for example, for solar manufacturers. It creates efficiencies around the solar manufacturing process itself, and thereby creating value for the global, for the national economy. And that's basically how that pipeline works in terms of creating value. But that's more specifically from structural perspective. There's an example in Brazil about how they've been procuring artificial intelligence. And if in your own organization's procurement of artificial intelligence is something of consideration, then this could be applicable to you. You'll see the fact that they speak about collaboration and partnerships. That's also quite important here.
Brazil has the largest universal health system in the world. And we have a lot of data. That huge amount of data is not used to make decisions, is not used to provide services in a smart way. So it's a hotspot for AI use because you can use different sources of data and create new solutions in order to integrate this data. And we were facing a situation where a lot of government bodies from the federal, state, municipal level, all of them were interested to acquire AI solutions, but they didn't know how to procure these kind of things. And so we decided to make a project about that. We developed a framework to support the Brazilian public sector in order to acquire AI in a responsible and most effective way. One of the uses that we are doing is about hospital exams. The AI project was used to screen COVID problems in the lung of the patients at the beginning of the pandemic. We first involved more than 50 hospitals in Brazil in order to understand what kind of solution we would have to develop. Because it's not like to procure software from Microsoft that's available for everybody. That's a final product. No, each AI product is specific for application according to needs. It's not packaged in a box. And after we did that, the next step was to make the acquisition. And this is the AI procurement in a box that we developed. The C4IR network had a huge impact in our project. The collaboration was key because we didn't start from zero. We had some work that were developed in the UK. We access this knowledge and experience of the people of the network who participated in this initiative. We've adapted the material for the Brazilian reality and applied it then in a real world situation. It saves us time, money, and most important, we use the project in UK to convince actors in Brazil to do that. This project will help them to make the right decisions, to make the right acquisitions, have the right impact.
So what we're seeing here is the fact that collaboration, the fact that developing these solutions is actually important for advancing AI and what that would look like from an organization perspective. And we can also consider this from a national perspective as well. Now, nationally, what we see is that there are countries, for example, Rwanda, that have mapped out what their AI policy should actually look like. And I'm not considering the giants when it comes to AI. These are the more developing areas around what artificial intelligence looks like from a policy perspective. So they've mapped out what their AI implementation should look like, what their plan of action should be, and there are some really good steps in terms of what it is or what they should be considered from a policy perspective. So this is one of the areas to watch as well when it comes to policy development. We are developing as well an AI national policy, in South Africa itself. We are producing recommendations towards an AI national strategy that will at some point constitute the policy itself. But the idea is that these recommendations will inform the strategy and they are to contribute towards a policy. Now, what we found is that one of the aspects around artificial intelligence is around the ethics. It's around us actually producing some sort of inclusivity around artificial intelligence. We've seen that inclusivity is not just gender. It's not around making sure that there are an equal number of males and females around the table, and equity from that perspective is also age. We've seen in Egypt, there are schools that are rolling out programs to actually skill students in artificial intelligence to ensure that they are workplace ready. We're also seeing in Germany something called an apprenticeship program. And what's really admirable about this particular process and the way it's been formed is that, so the way in which it works is that we're able to have the public and private sectors interact in a way, but we're also able to give apprenticeship experience through practical hands-on training while also giving them studies and formal education as well. So the way in which Germany has been able to bring together 4 parties is actually quite admirable. It's their Chamber of Commerce, it's their national government, it's the local municipalities, and the private sector. And bringing together those 4 is how it's been possible to ensure sustainability and the success of this particular apprenticeship program. And this is how collaboration works, it's how inclusivity within the AI space works as well. Now, in terms of AI, up until now, we've spoken about the good around AI. We've spoken about it from a technology perspective and how it can be used for good. But there's also some risks around the AI space. So we speak about AI actually being an avenue for biased information to come in, an avenue for unethical information to come in, and this is why it's important. Some of the big tech players are actually making some bold, some optimistic strides in terms of how they advance the technology. And what we're seeing happen from their perspective is that we're going to need to hold, and us and our roles that come into place, us holding them accountable for what it is that they're putting out there. Now, Google had done a study around 17 countries, and what came about that in terms of their views of AI is that people are in general very optimistic about artificial intelligence and what it can do. However, what they'd like to see is how leaders, business leaders and both government leaders are going to use AI in a way that is profitable for the companies, that is equitable, that is inclusive as well. And that's primarily what comes out of studies like that. This year, 4 billion people are going to the polls to vote. In our history, in our human civilization history, this is the most number of elections that's taking place. It means that we have the opportunity to use technology for good here. Remember that not all synthetic data that is created is bad, and not all human-created data is good. So we're going to have to find ways in which we can hold technology accountable, in ways in which we can use technology in order to advance us forward and help us to achieve, have a positive swing when it comes to the elections itself. Now, the last part of this masterclass is around your role when it comes to the SDGs and when it comes to leveraging artificial intelligence itself. But let's speak specifically around your role first. One of the biggest things is going to be around designing systems, around taking the systemic and systematic approach in terms of how we design solutions. It's around being a team player and operating as part of a whole. What we're seeing happen is that continuous learning is actually something quite important. Alvin Toffler, he's a futurist, he actually says that the illiterate of the 21st century is going to be that person who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's going to be quite significant. But what is certain with all the change that's going to take place is that we're going to see multi-level cooperation that's going to take place between people and between machines. And that goes without saying that that is something that is going to exist. Your role specifically is going to be around solving problems. If we look at each of the Sustainable Development Goals and we break them down, we see that each of them are complex problems that need to be solved. And that's primarily where your role is going to come into play. It's around solving these problems, but doing it in a way that changes the problem-solving process. So not in traditional problem-solving methodologies. It's around changing the act of power within these problem-solving mechanics. There's an initiative called Mothers to Mothers, M2M. What they've done is actually these are women who have HIV and AIDS and are living with HIV and AIDS. They are now frontline health workers. They are mentor mothers to new mothers who have HIV and AIDS. What it's done is shifted the power to these frontline mentor mothers so that they can now assist and help new mothers who have HIV and AIDS. It's fundamentally changed the power dynamic in the problem-solving process and helped for other individuals to take on these specific roles. And that becomes fundamental when we are solving problems. Who has the power now? Then in terms of your next steps and what's going to be important for you, the one aspect is around embracing AI, embracing artificial intelligence. Marie Curie said this about mathematics and science, and I believe the same applies to artificial intelligence. She said that nothing is to be feared about maths and science. It is only to be understood. And it's the same when it comes to AI. There's nothing to be feared about it. It really is only to be understood. When it comes to AI, one of the big things around this is around understanding the terminologies, breaking it down, like we did today when it comes to machine learning and generative AI, reading up about it, understanding that at its core, it is just simple mathematics, that it is not this complicated rocket science, and that you can understand it, that everyone can understand it. For those of you who have used ChatGPT, you would have already seen this, the screenshot on the right would look very familiar to you. So use it more and more in your jobs. Use it to produce strategies for your specific application areas. Use it to innovate in your specific area. Tailor-make it to do what you need to do in your specific job. Use it in your personal life to plan a trip or to create a meal plan or something like that. What we're going to see happen is that we're going to have a countdown come into play now between 2025 and 2030, the last 5 years of us achieving the SDGs. And we're going to need to increasingly hold people more and more accountable as we get to that stage. What this is going to need from our perspective is it's going to need us to innovate. And innovation is actually a team sport. It's going to take us being bold and optimistic about what technology can do. It's going to take us being realistic about the risks around technology and artificial intelligence. But most of all, it's going to take us being very efficient around the collaboration and the partnerships that we form when it comes to artificial intelligence itself. In order for us to win the game, we're all going to need to collaborate and form partnerships. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
I'm very excited about AI and tech for good and the possibilities that AI and emerging technology can have for us to reconnect with these, realizing the SDGs and a lot of the challenges that are faced by us here in the Global South, and particularly with regards to the SDGs and things that came out of the discussions before, sort of these data analysis and insights, that big data power that AI is helping us to harness and really use to find creative and really much better solutions and to leapfrog technologies to find very effective ways of using these technologies to help solve a lot of our problems. And this comes in precision agriculture and food security, as was mentioned before, healthcare and disease management for telemedicine, equal healthcare access, education and literacy, which can help. It's a problem because we need to also learn how to use the AI, but it has incredible power to bridge gaps in literacy and access to education. And we've already seen this with the metaverse assisted by AI over the last 2 years, and including particularly with South Africa, with energy efficiency and climate change, it can really help us bridge some of those gaps there, as well as financial inclusion and economic empowerment. But then there's a tech for good, but it would be really irresponsible for me not to mention some of the challenges that were also presented. So the data availability and the quality of data, as our speakers have said before, there's a big problem with the quality of the data sets that are being used in AI technology. AI basically is being trained on the data sets available on the internet, and as we all know, those are very unbalanced. Minorities are not represented. LGBTQ groups are not represented. And all of those go into training these AI technologies and models that now produce solutions that are not including those groups. And particularly in the global south, that can be highly problematic for us. And then there's the issue of ethical and bias. So we talked about the algorithms and what goes into those algorithms basically, but the algorithms are, trained on the data sets. They are essentially a black box. And they are also provided by big technology, which we didn't actually go into a lot of detail. And I'm going to ask Professor Balmahoon to go into that in a little bit more detail, is how we sort of negotiate our relationship with big technology and the fact that these AI models are essentially owned by big technology. And these are proprietary models, so they're black boxes essentially. We don't know what goes into the data sets, we don't know how the algorithms are trained, and we don't know how they're providing sort of solutions for us. And also AI has a tendency to go rogue and provide very creative answers to solutions, which can be very dangerous, even though very entertaining sometimes, but very dangerous, particularly if we're using them for solutions, particularly healthcare solutions in the global south, so we need to be very circumspect with how we use those. And then there's a sort of skills and training gaps that it would take us to sort of bridge those gaps to be effectively using the AI for the civil society and to effectively use them in government. What are the major skills gaps that we would need to sort of attack with that? And how could we use AI to bridge those gaps? And what are the dangers there? Sort of the inclusivity and accessibility is also a problem. And perhaps I can address that under the sort of digital divide question, is that we haven't talked much about the digital divide. And when we talk about Global South and digitalization, that is a major issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe first, maybe at the same time, but we definitely need to address sort of infrastructure and development, how to promote digital literacy, how to promote these public-private partnerships with the digital divide. And you've also mentioned sort of gender inclusivity. Basically, like these are some things that really need to be addressed. Women are often left out of the digital inclusivity and sort of the digital move forward. How do you bridge those gaps and not let AI race ahead with leaving women and minority groups behind? And then maybe just as a final question, sort of the R&D aspect is great to foster innovation and to try and build these public-private partnerships, but the real question here is also of data affordability. So all of these sort of problems or solutions doesn't bear in mind the fact that South Africa has some of the highest data costs in the world. So until we attack these or sort of solve these very basic problems, can we use AI to help us solve these problems? Or is this something we really need to talk about solving first before we go into the AI question and solution? So thank you very much to both our speakers, and I hope that isn't too much for you.
Thank you very much. After two very competent speeches and a respondent, I'm trying to summing up on 3 points, basically. Try to be brief because the key points have already been made on things. I have three elements that I have. One is on the framework, one is on the ethics, and the third one is really on AI and the use of it. For the framework, I think it helps to remind us that the SDGs that we talk about, 2015, it was a time that nobody spoke of AI. It was a thing of the future. Digitalization was a thing of the future. So we're trying to reintroduce that discussion into an ongoing debate. That's part of what we're currently doing. Also at the UN level, we have a global digital compact in the making that should be out in September. And the work will start only then. It's not that we just say tick and it's done, but it's something that we need to think of and we need to be aware of. Secondly, role of the civil service. Ethics come to play quite a lot. Civil service has a role to play in lots of aspects when it comes to digitalization and AI. It sets the framework, as Serusha also mentioned, in terms of costs for the internet. How do you regulate it? How much do you give regulation to a market? How do you develop a market? Also has to do with how you regulate it as a state. It is not just the market itself doing it. It is also about service delivery. Big issue in this country, but in all countries basically, where how do civil services use digitalization to better provide services? That is about how you ask questions. It is not just about making a process that already exists as a digital one, so it's on the computer. You have to think in terms of how you connect dots and how you make that happening jointly with technological tools. It's a tool, it's not a solution in itself. It also has to do with data protection. You are collecting a number of data. We have a number of data, we meaning the state, individuals, companies, and others have numbers of data that we have to both connect, but also make sure that privacy is ensured at the same time. It's a bit, a lot of pathos in it, but the discussion in South Africa 30 years ago was Amandla Wetu, power to the people. The East German Revolution was, we are the people, reminding the government, you do these things for us. It's not you should do that. And I think that's something that's ethical also for the civil service. You have to be aware of this is done for a purpose. It's done for people. It is governing for a purpose, it's not governing as top-down. So that has a lot to do with agency that we are creating, or as Busani said, it's empowering citizens. And that's what a civil service is about. It's not governing, it's empowering. And last point about the AI discussion. I said digitalization is very recent. AI we discussed since a year and a half, 2 years. And very much so now, within this year, not as a thing of the future. It is already there. When you are in education, you know that you have your students write an essay. You have to do that differently now. Otherwise, you get nice ChatGPT answers. Not quite helpful to understand how much they have understood, so you have to already change how you are operating. You also have to think about, and that's more from an aspect on inter- and transnational cooperation, interoperability. How much do you create islands of solutions? How much do you connect? And all of that can only be done through cooperation. Can only be done at a certain level of exchange, be that international, government to government, but also transnational in terms of us talking to each other, us researchers, us civil society members, and us business people. Last but not least, AI, as it was very clearly pointed out by Reevana, is helping to make decisions. It is not making the decisions. So you have to ask, as I said previously, you have to ask the right questions. I'm using a very nice phrasing now, but in the discussion you all very often have a harsher wording as if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. If you don't ask the right questions, you will not get the right answers. And I think that is the point, and also for our discussion now, to understand the tool much better. And it was one of the recommendations by, I think it was Reevana saying that, use ChatGPT, try it. You see when you get a rubbish answer. Sometimes it is fun, as Serusha said. If you get it in the wrong moment, it is dangerous indeed. So do use it, try it, see what it can do, and then realize how we can use it and develop the skills further. I'm very much looking forward to the engagement with all of you in that. And those were the 3 points that I wanted to highlight as the last commenter.
All right, the session is now open for your discussions.
Hi, I'm Adriana Ligero from ENAP in Brazil, and people who have known me a while have heard me say that I am not very tech savvy, right? I'm this person I'm 47 years old. I'm very resistant to using technology. I'm not stupid, so I've learned to use the technology that I have to use for my work and my life. But I'm the sort of person who doesn't like to have social media, and I have understood that yes, technology is here to stay and AI is here to stay, and I've even tried out ChatGPT. But I was wondering, and I'd love to hear some of the specialists speak a little bit about how we might come about using a different narrative to get people like me to understand that they need to learn how to use artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. I was a little bit shocked at the show of hands here in this room of all these wonderful specialists in their own fields, and many of us had not used ChatGPT ever. And only 4 of us have the advanced version that for $25 is so amazing, right? And so I think the message is clearly not getting across. And I think the presentations here were very interesting in terms of talking about possibilities and risks, but it all seems very distant from our reality, from my reality day to day. So how do I apply this? So I work a lot with helping people to understand the problem so that they can come up with solutions that are more adequate to the problems. And we're trying to learn better how to incorporate technology into the solutions. But what is the sort of narrative that I think, and then I think that's part of the problem, is the narrative. How do you get people to actually understand what you're saying? So right now I was like trying to take notes about the difference between generative AI, and it's like, wait, you lost me there, with that 5-minute explanation. But do I really need to know the technical difference between one and the other? Right? Or is a better way of telling me about what generative AI is by showing me ChatGPT in use with what that wonderful $25 package will get you? That sort of narrative is what I'm very interested in for people who, all those people who are not accessing these things. How do we get to them?
Thank you. Hi, very quickly. This is Simone speaking. My name's in Mexico City. I'm a senior researcher and scientist and been working a lot on environmental issues. So I have one comment and one question. So one comment is about why we are off track with the SDGs. I think that we should introduce a critical thinking. The problem is that the SDGs is running over an underneath economic model that is really not working for many years. It's reproducing inequalities, and I'm not going into now the issue of the structural deficiencies that we have within the economic issues, but yeah, that would be something that we have to keep in mind in terms of it's not working, okay? And there's also, again, it's not an issue of lack of willingness, which is also a problem of lack of economic financial support, but I think I would like warning everyone to think about how is our economic model working, first one. The second one is about an issue that, I'm kind of, I would say, a talking cricket or the Gemini cricket here for a PRODIGEES project that we have. PRODIGEES is a EU-funded project, part of the MGG also, and other issues. So it's about digitalization in powers in the global south and emerging powers. And one of the topics that I work on is about the environmental impacts of digitalization. I would like to warn again about this unsustainable process that we're going through, because the natural resources, but also a lot of things that we are using to sustain this process, they are also bringing us again to the edge of collapse. So thank you very much.
That's okay. I have many questions, but I would like to focus on who's responsible for AI. I mean, governments or enterprises or people, because AI is about data, and who's responsible for designing and integrating those important inputs for the artificial intelligence. And I think that what my tocaya what Adriana said about we're mistaken the narrative. I think that maybe we don't need, or most people don't need to know what's AI generative or machine learning or this more technical things, but we do have to know that there's not only ChatGPT, there are a lot of AI tools and a lot of companies that are designing this kind of models to make our life easier. No, I think that the pandemic was maybe the only or one of the positive sides of pandemic is that most of all have to jump into a very technical systems working from home, knowing or learning about Zoom, about Google Meet and all the stuff in Mexico. We have been working and struggling with training teachers to adapt to new technologies. But during pandemic, I mean, most of the teachers in the different levels, from basic levels to university levels, not only the teachers, but also the students have to jump in just right away to learn how to interact with a machine, with a computer, with the Zoom, with the Google Meet. So I think that maybe it's just like swimming. You don't have to know what muscles do you have to move, but you have to move when you are in the water, or otherwise you will be drowning. And maybe the real question is how to jump in as quick as possible and to make the best decisions in defining who's the responsible stakeholder in the data analysis and in the data integration.
Can we take a few more on this side, and then we'll Ashraf, and then did I forget somebody? Well, I'll come back to the two of you. Yeah, that will give you a chance to end off at the end. Yeah?
Okay, thank you very much, Salim. I'm Izima Lachi from the National School of Government. My question goes to Dr. Kifilwe. She made a comment in her presentation that we need to prioritize the role of local authorities. So we know that in South Africa, most of the local authorities are in areas where there's a lot of underdevelopment. They are in the rural parts of South Africa, very remote. Connectivity there is a problem. They have challenges with poverty, unemployment. They are more concerned about having a toilet and water than digitization. So how do we move from where they are currently, to prioritize them and shift their minds towards realizing that, there is value in digitalization? That's for Dr. Kifilwe. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thanks, colleagues. Again, I think as we begin to engage with the AI discourse in South Africa, especially using the policy development policy cycle, we've had the presidential 4IR commission, and now I see the WTO, the World Economic Forum, is moving into AI. So South Africa was one of only 18 countries that had a 4IR center. In fact, it was based at the CSIR. And you've had that kind of capability over 4 years, but during the COVID period, there was hardly any impact on the 4IR Commission findings. You've had 4 years of 4IR Commission sitting in the presidency. You've had recommendations that were released in 2021, and they're quite vast, over 100 pages. And yet you see no implementation or impact of IT of 4IR. A few good examples. Number one, we've had a driver's license in South Africa that has had major delays with IT. There's only one driver's license machine in South Africa that had to go to Europe for repairs. So there's no 4IR, yet we've had a commission. And now we see a big debate on the AI policy, Minister of Telecoms, Gungubele, launched the AI policy 2 weeks ago without any public consultation, without any public participation. So the thing is AI and 4IR just gimmicks coming from government? Or does government really take the public and the civil service or the public domain seriously? Or is AI another kind of gimmick because it's election time? So I think we need to ask much more critical questions on AI, 4IR. And again, you need public regulation or regulation of AI and 4IR in the public domain. Thank you.